Welcome to the High Bar, your weekly watering hole for lighthearted conversation with people who care about culture that matters. I'm Warren Etheridge, your host and barkeep. I promise never to cut anyone off and to always encourage you to think responsibly. Today we're going to raise a toast to and raise the bar for grassroots politics. Today we're raising a toast and raising the bar for grassroots politics with Stephen Gyllenhaal, who is not only a filmmaker but also a tremendous poet, trying to find the one other job that doesn't pay anything. But you are here as somebody who actually believes. You seem to believe that people can still have power in this country.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think actually, if you take, Obama getting elected, and I can't say I totally agree with all that's gone on, he was elected because people believed, and grassroots politics really came out of the woodwork again. And it's happened, oftentimes in American politics. So yeah, I believe. Then the question is, how do you keep the grassroots policies going? But no, I absolutely believe. It's right out there.
Well, grassroots politics works for getting somebody into office, but does it actually represent the people in any manner?
I think it does. I mean, I think politics is a slow, nasty process, and there's certainly been a shift from what the last president was doing and this president was doing in some areas. I mean, there are many areas where I disagree, and I think grassroots politics may prove itself again. I mean, I may not like the Tea Party movement, but the Tea Party movement is certainly a grassroots element. It then can get financed by other things, but I think, whether the people in top like it or not, the leaders at the top anywhere in the world, democracy is taken seriously. I mean, and it's a relatively new thing. I mean, the last 300 or 400 years, it's really come into its own. I mean, before that, you believed in kings and queens and all that. Now you have to at least pretend that you believe in democracy, and democracy is the concept of people.
Well, I think that's what Americans do. We pretend we believe in democracy.
Now,
I know that I'm somewhat cynical, but the flip side of cynicism is a little bit of idealism.
Oh, absolutely.
But you're telling me I can't even look back at the good old days because they weren't all that good.
Well, let's go back to the good old days.
All right.
Let's go back to our forefathers, that lovely, wonderful time. We had slavery, minor problem.
Right, absolutely.
Women had no rights, minor problem. It was all and actually the murder rate per capita was far, far higher in that era than it is now. But it's a minor problem. And 50% of the people were on the side of the British, so. But other than that, it was great back then.
So you're just a contemporary Pollyanna here. Everything is going
no,
well
I think
for
it's
us.
sucked all along.
But let's talk about your new project. Your new project is a fictionalized account of Seattle's own Grant Cogswell, who is truly more idealistic than I am, and often less sober.
That's true. That's true. You want to drink to that?
I do want to drink to that. Cheers to Grant. Grant. But why Grant Cogswell? I mean, he's not. I know that there was some coverage of him nationally, but really not a national story.
No. Well, I mean, I think first of all, when I found the book Zion Check for President, I really wasn't looking for anything but a story. And in the book, and fiction or nonfiction, novels, whatever, are large animals to try to gain control of and turn into what is generally having to be a pretty simple story when you make a movie. I was just looking for a good story. That's really it. And I don't think, as a storyteller, as a filmmaker or a storyteller, you want to get too dogmatic about anything you're doing. It's the death of what I think storytellers really are, which is at core subversive. I mean, you want to be subversive of all structures so that what comes to the top is human beings. First and foremost, human beings. The rest of it comes and goes. Empires, kings and queens, democracies, all of that come and go. Human beings are what are most fascinating and profoundly important to stories. So I found this book and felt these are a couple of interesting characters in here. The fact that it was politics was less interesting to me than it was interesting characters. Now I am very political, and I have my own points of view, but that's not what drew me to the story finally. And I think Grant is a wonderful character. And I think also, talking about Grassroots, that the deeper I got into it, the less national a figure he was, and Phil and everyone else around, the more interested I became. Because I think ultimately, you know, the old saying, you act locally, you think globally, you act locally, is a critical part of this whole process. You know, that this is really a local story. I didn't know Seattle when I first got involved with this. I've since come back and spent a lot of time here and gotten to know it and really kind of understood the culture of Seattle and how it informed all of this, being different than other places. You know, but every place is different, and if you can somehow gather the characters to go to that place together, you have both an interesting story and you have grassroots politics. You have all of those things.
Well, so that's nice, and movies normally give us happy endings. Grant's ending is not that. Oh, sorry. Well, these people are from Seattle. They know. Come on.
Well, what I'd say is, let's talk about movies a little bit in terms of that. There were a bunch of Rocky movies. Mm-hmm. The first one was wonderful.
Great.
What happened at the end of the first one?
He loses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know? And it's not ultimately about winning. I think one of the most important things about politics, and I think it's happened here in Seattle as I've come to understand it, is you make a statement. You take a position. It's not about winning. Frankly, it's the corporations, it's the people in power that believe in winning. I think what real grassroots politics is about is politics and ideas. It's about policy and ideas. And in fact, what Grant did to Seattle, and I didn't know it when I came into the project, is that he was kind of a catalyst for the whole kind of rock and roll music world industry here, which was gaining more and more power as a lot of the other industries here were sort of beginning to fall away. And I think there's a whole out-of-the-box kind of series of industries in Seattle for a bunch of interesting reasons that Grant's thinking began to sort of move the politics, the grassroots politics here, in which I think people could say that who's now mayor and what's going on in Seattle was really started a little bit by what Grant was doing. So you don't.
I mean, Grant Cogswell. I mean, love him dearly, admire the effort, but really, really, has he changed anything?
Well, you know, the irony of the whole thing may be that Grant, as he's captured in this movie, may have a major effect. That if this movie works the way I think it could, which is not just the movie, but talk about grassroots, is the whole social media part of this now, really using the internet, and the fact that, for instance, has this movie come along at the right time? You never know when you make a movie. You make a movie, like I said, because of story. It may have larger impact, it may not. But when you suddenly look at Grant's beliefs, which were we should have had a monorail system here, frankly, you look at what's happened. One of the things that's interesting about Seattle, and will be captured in the film, is that it's a quite Byzantine highway system, bridge system that exists here. It's pretty strange. And a monorail was really a very smart idea, you know, so that, okay, so it didn't happen. And it's like...
Even though we voted for it.
Even though you voted for it. Time. But the authorities didn't want it.
Crazy public.
But no, wasn't the public was, I think, right on target with the whole thing. And you go up to Vancouver and you see they've got the SkyTrain, and it really works very, very well. And it's silly not to have a monorail, because then the traffic below can move. It doesn't affect the traffic below. You've got trains that are moving a la the subways in, you know, New York or Paris or London, where they just go from station to station. They're very quick. Anyway, it didn't happen. It hasn't happened yet. You know, I'd almost say let's start a campaign again to get the monorail up and running, but I think that would drive everyone crazy. But I'm not adverse to driving people crazy a little bit. But I think, on the other hand, is this a moment when I think, frankly, one of the worst catastrophes that Western civilization has put onto the planet, which is this BP oil thing, which is just an astonishing horror. And it sits beneath the ocean still, but it's going to affect us for a long, long time. And it's not going to be the last time. That this, when do we start to go, we've got to stop using oil? And I think we may be coming to the point where we've got to rearrange all of that. And what Grant was talking about, which is mass transportation, you know, is in fact an issue that could be a national, international issue that this little film could begin to affect. So the key to it is Grant's passion, I think. And that passion captured in the film can have a real effect.
But it's a close, you know, it's a close situation where you have, you know, passion on one side and nuttiness on the other.
Oh yeah, well, that's part of the fun. You know, and I think, you know, in a certain way, in a poet, he's a poet also. Right. And, you know, I think, okay, we got that nuttiness on that side. let's take the corporate lawyers that are running our country. These guys in their suits and their approach, how well have they done? You do take BP.
I don't think
you
they've
do
done
take
well at
Wall
all.
Street. You do take, and the lack of regulation.
Right.
You take all these guys talking to each other. I go, I'd rather have a nutcase in there, frankly, than a lot of those guys who look so rational and good. And at least throw this in. Look, I believe in politics. I believe in the give and take, on some levels. But I like to sort of throw some things in there to stir it up a little bit. And
Right, but the last time we threw in a homogenized nutcase like Ralph Nader, that did not pan out well for the country.
he didn't get elected, as I last remember.
No, that's what I'm saying. But he certainly did have an impact, didn't he?
Yeah. I think, Ralph Nader is an interesting guy, and I actually had gotten to know him at one point. I think he was very important in the early 60s, very, very important. And I think, as much as he had an effect, Ross Perot had an effect on the other end. Clinton would never have been elected if it weren't for Ross Perot the first time around. But
win one, lose one.
Yeah, exactly. And I never said it was neat and clean either. I never claimed that democracy and grassroots politics are neat and clean. But I think he did represent, and he was actually correct about a lot of the stuff. He was really talking about corporate power and its incredible corrosiveness. He was going over and over and over again. He was speaking before his time. Jimmy Carter was talking about the same thing. We have to think, I think, in larger cycles than just our 10 years even. We have to think about hundreds of years even. And I think these questions have to be really raised. And I think there really is now a growing concern about corporate control, corporate lack of regulation, its incredible damage, and how does one solve that? I do believe that corporations are valuable, but they do need to have, I think, grassroots human beings, individual human beings, putting them into check and saying, look, this isn't working for us. It may be working for somebody up there, but it isn't working for us. And the way that really only gets answered is through grassroots politics, which becomes very organized. There are a lot of organizations that, particularly now with the internet, can virally send messages around very effectively, I think.
But the candidate shows, you can have all the best ideals in the world and want to represent your people, even if you are like a handsome blonde guy, that you can want to do that, but once you get into the system, it's virtually impossible to do anything.
Although you take Dennis Kucinich, he's definitely...
He's too short to be presidential.
No, he can't be presidential, but I think he has a real important impact on the dialogue of the country. And I think particularly as these things go wrong, it reaches a point of being so corrosive. And I think, look, do I believe in violence? No. I think the problem with violence is that it's a continuation of the same process, which is that power rules in some way. And all that really happened with the kings and the Communist Party and all this, it just became too weak, or the Roman Empire, whatever you want to say, it became too weak. The violence didn't really solve anything. What did solve things were the ideas. The ideas shifted. And those are the most powerful things. If you really go back through history and you look at it in a long range, it was that the ideas began to collapse. And whether it was religious ideas, whether it was the idea of Marxism, whether it's the ideas of unbridled capitalism, these ideas come into vogue, and when they prove not to work, the ideas begin to collapse because a new idea starts to come on the scene. And it's out of individual human beings, one or two people even talking, I don't care where they are, Kansas, anywhere, where ideas begin to actually emerge and catch fire. And that's, and there may be violence around some of that, but that's not what really drives the change.
It's just the idea.
Yeah. I would actually say...
So in the past 10 years, we got tired of the idea of personal privacy, and that just went away. It wasn't an idea change. That was more power taking what it wanted, wasn't it?
There's a fascinating thing about our loss of privacy, and one of the examples is in Russia under Ronald Reagan, in which they spent...
He led that country too?
He led that country too.
Now he's an overachiever.
Yes, he is. Well,
that's why he's a
he
great
never
communicator.
slept like you.